Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Alison Craig, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Air Vice Marshal Tracy Smart. Today, we commemorate the 70th anniversary of Australian involvement in peacekeeping operations. In 1947, Australians were part of the first group of United Nations military observers when a small contingent was deployed to monitor the ceasefire between Dutch colonial and Indonesian nationalist forces. In those early years, peacekeepers were generally unarmed military observers. They promoted peace by ensuring that neither side in a conflict could violate a ceasefire or commit atrocities without the world learning about it. While today, the media is often seen as filling this role, military observers with peacekeeping operations have the training to assess situations accurately and impartially, and the ability to bring the influence of their governing bodies to bear. In Indonesia, for example, information from UN military observers helped set the conditions by which Indonesia won independence. And in 1950, the UN's judgment that North Korea had invaded the South was based in part on a report by Australian military observers. Australia's contributions to peacekeeping operations have since increased in size and scope. The commitment to Indonesia in 1947 consisted of just 4 officers. At the end of the 1970s, 150 Australian soldiers took part in a British Commonwealth operation as Zimbabwe won independence. A decade later, a larger contingent assisted a UN operation with a similar role in Namibia. In 1993, Australia had over 2,000 peacekeepers in the field, with large contingents in Cambodia and Somalia. And a year later, Australian peacekeepers were also in Rwanda. In 1999, Australia organised and led Interfet, contributing over 5,500 personnel as East Timor achieved independence from Indonesia. Australians have taken part in over 60 peacekeeping operations, and 7 multinational operations have been commanded by Australians to date. Peacekeeping has not only been the preserve of the Australian Defence Force. Civilians and police officers from Australia have served as far afield as Cambodia, Haiti, Mozambique, Bougainville and Timor. Importantly, this year saw the withdrawal of the last Australian federal police officers from the United Nations peacekeeping force in Cyprus. More than 1,600 Australian officers contributed to the peacekeeping force over a period of 53 years, working to maintain peace and stability, delivering humanitarian assistance and liaising between authorities. Peacekeeping is the front end of a complex, long-term process for creating the necessary conditions for sustainable peace. It is also usually the pointy end of this process, and it comes with inherent risks. 6 Australian peace officers were killed while serving in Cyprus, Solomon Islands and Timor-Leste. The Roll of Honour at the Australian War Memorial contains the names of an additional 10 Australian Defence Force personnel who have died while deployed on peacekeeping operations. Today, we pay tribute to those who played their part during the past 70 years of peacekeeping operations. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to those who returned home. We warmly welcome the family of Major Susan Lee Felch, whose story will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge Mr. Gordon Ramsay, representing the Australian Capital Territory Chief Minister, Minister for Veterans and Seniors. Rear Admiral Ryo Sakai and Rear Admiral Tomohiko Madono, Japan. Rear Admiral Michael Noonan, Deputy Chief of Navy, Australia. Matthew Kronberg, Executive Director of United Nations Association of Australia, Mr. John King, President RSL ACT Branch, and representatives of the Australian Medical Association. We welcome the peacekeepers and their families, and we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, Lake Cargellico Central School and Currumbina School, Lane Cove. From Queensland, Trinity Lutheran College, Ashmore and Redeemer Lutheran College Primary Department, Rochdale. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catafalque party, attention! Catafalque party, present up!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free.
School students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here is the record that they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Major Susan Lee Felsch. Susan Lee Stones was born in Brisbane on the 24th of March 1961. An excellent student, at 17 she began studying medicine at the University of Queensland. Here she pursued her interest in military medicine and enlisted in the Naval Reserve, rising to the rank of petty officer. Her family encouraged a strong sense of community service from an early age. In 1983, she joined the Army Undergraduate Scheme, which offered the prospects of challenging and rewarding service for medical officers. Following her graduation in December 1984, Dr. Stones spent 2 years working in remote Queensland before being posted to the 5th Military Hospital at Duntroon in 1987. It was here that she met and later married fellow Army officer Klaus Felsch. Susan combined a busy military career with part-time study and after-hours work in the emergency departments of local hospitals. In 1991, she was promoted to Major and became a Fellow of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. She was posted to the Directorate General of Army Health Services before being posted as the medical officer in charge of clinical services at the 1st Military Hospital at Yeronga. Her commanding officer there described her as a spirited woman with a great love of life, a doctor protective of her patients, and an officer with a shining career ahead of her. On the 17th of May 1993, at the age of 32, she deployed as the medical officer to the 4th Australian Staff Contingent to Operation Sedilla, the Australian presence with the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara. The UN mission involved monitoring the ceasefire between rebel separatists and the Moroccan army, and the identification and registration of voters, largely in refugee camps. The proposed referendum would resolve whether the Western Sahara would become independent or would be incorporated as part of Morocco. Felsch coped admirably with the challenges of living in the Sahara, living in basic conditions and driving through the shifting sands with the ever-present threat of landmines. Her commander noted, "I'm yet to meet a more professional and competent doctor in the Army. She was totally dedicated to her profession and the well-being of our contingent." She was attached to the Swiss medical unit based in the Western Sahara capital, Layoun. In June, Major Felsch was based in the remote Orzad post, some 800 kilometres from United Nations headquarters, and conducted many of her medical visits to the southern team sites by air. On the morning of the 21st of June, she boarded the plane for a routine visit to the Dugaj team site with her Swiss and Norwegian UN colleagues. Shortly after takeoff, the plane veered to the left and the nose dropped. The aircraft cartwheeled into the ground and the spare fuel tanks caught fire. A civilian UN employee saw the crash, extinguished the flames and pulled her free, but she died that morning in the medical treatment room of a Moroccan army camp. She became the first Australian woman to die on overseas service since the Second World War, and the second Australian soldier to die on a peacekeeping mission. Her remains were returned to Australia, where she was buried at Cleveland with full military honours, following a service at the Trinity Uniting Church, where she had taught Sunday school for 15 years and had been married 5 years earlier. The Australian contingent renamed its Kangaroo Club canteen the Major Susan Felsch Bar in her honour, and on the 6th of May 1994, shortly before it withdrew from Western Sahara, a remembrance ceremony took place at a memorial dedicated to her and the other crew who had died in the accident. Each year, the Royal Military College awards the Major Susan Lee Felsch Memorial Trust Prize to the best RWMC graduate. She was posthumously awarded the United Nations Dag Hammarskjöld Medal. Her name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, along with the names of 102,000 Australians who died serving their country in operations overseas. Her photograph is displayed beside the pool of reflection. This is but one story of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Major Susan Lee Fels, who gave her life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult party, present up. Catapult party, shoulder up.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult party, outwards, turn. Catapult party, quick, out.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses, barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over, but in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you a very good evening.